Okay, so the floor is open to questions, discussions, comments. Keep it short, please, because it would be nice to have everyone chip in.
Why don't we revise the poverty line every year by taking food inflation into consideration? It will give us a better picture of the actual poverty.
Should I give it to you or just keep answering?
If you want to club it, I think it would be better in case there's some repetition. Someone wants to add on to a question. Take 2 or 3 at a time.
Or I can answer that.
Okay.
Actually, in fact, they do keep updating it. They update it because the Planning Commission reports poverty rates only for what are called the thick rounds of the NSS. These are the quinquennial rounds that are done every 5 years. In fact, 2011-12 is unusual. It's an off-cycle round that was done because 2009-10 was a very bad drought year. 2009-10, I think, was the worst drought year in nearly 40 years. So because it was a bad drought year, the expectation was that for the plan period, or you could say before elections, whatever, whichever one you prefer, let's do one more check-in. And so that's why they did a survey that was done for 2011-12. So every time these surveys are done, they update the line and it's updated with inflation. So in fact, that is being done. I think the discussion is less so about the updating procedure, it's about where you benchmark it. At what, do you set it at this level, or do you set it at a much higher level?
Yeah.
Elementary question. This last thing which you said regarding benchmark, could you elaborate what is the thought process which goes into setting this benchmark? Is it a clinical procedure or is there an emotive content in that?
Or is it an emotive?
Because poverty is not something to do with numbers alone.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll tell you, I can give you, many countries do it in very different ways. Yeah, so for example, in the OECD countries, it's a percentage, it's a proportion of the median income. So as the country as the median income increases, they raise the poverty line as well. So, if the median household has this standard of living, then who we as a society declare as poor are those who live at less than half of that income. So that's one way in which it's done. There are countries, one that's another approach that's quite popular is anchoring it to caloric, to some calorie level. And this is more common in poorer countries, in which, so you say that the nutritional norms suggest that in order to have a healthy existence, at least the minimum amount of calorie that you need to be consuming per day is something, 2400 or 2100 in India. And sorry, I know, so that's what I'm saying, it's based on calories. The common one is calories, and then added to that is some allowance for non-food expenditures. Now there's in the Latin American countries, they've moved away from that. So for example, in Mexico, there is a lot of discussion about moving to these multi-dimensional poverty indices, in which it's not just based on consumption. Consumption is one element, but they also look at health, access to infrastructure, certain types of infrastructure, so drinking water, etc., education, and that is an index is created out of those. So in Mexico, that's what they're adopting. They're moving away entirely from consumption. I think, but the Tendulkar committee, when it did this, I think they shied away from any normative discussion of where it should be. So essentially, the Indian poverty lines are what was done with the calorie anchor in the by the Lakrawala committee for 1987-88. The Tendulkar committee took those lines, took the urban line in 2004-05 as the starting point, and then did a much better job calculating the spatial price indices. And that led to then the whole array of lines between rural and urban areas. Well, so you have to actually study the report carefully to try and infer what the rationale must have been. Yeah, so the rationale in that is that, well, we want, obviously you need to read the report too. I am giving you my interpretation of their report, but much better to read theirs. But my interpretation of their report is that their thinking was that there is we want some connection with this, with what we've been doing over the last, several decades. So we don't want to completely have completely a different line altogether. So then, well, we want a connection. We've got a rural line, we've got an urban line. Let's look at characteristics of people who live around the rural line, characteristics of people who live around the urban line. The urban looks more reasonable because there are many people above the rural poverty line who still have the kinds of jobs that you think you're more likely to have if you're poor, the nutrition, measures of underweight, malnourishment, not nutrition. The measures of malnutrition are much higher than what the rural poverty line suggests, but urban looks okay. Urban looks much better, so let's start with urban. So that was the starting point, and then we will do better spatial indices and make one more change, which is that the original committee had not made any allowance for health and education expenditures under the expectation that these were to be publicly provided goods, publicly provided services. So, citizens were not expected to spend on health and education. You didn't need to price them into a poverty line. Well, the fact is that people are not using there's a lot of out-of-pocket expenditures on these issues, on these items. So, they took the urban line, they made an allowance, an additional allowance for health and education. That's my take. I mean, you have to talk to, sorry? I don't know, I mean, I think it is it's a subjective discussion. So, I don't know whether, I was personally, so not as a World Bank, it's not a World Bank view, personal view, I think we needed to raise the line at some point. At the same time, I view it, I have no problem with having two lines. I think it's important to have a benchmark and stick to it for a while, for a good long time, so that you have a yardstick against which you measure improvements. But as we get richer, we need to raise the line, especially if you're going to tie government support to the existence of that line. See, I think what makes it really, I don't have a problem with the line in general, as long as you're updating it properly. As soon as you start linking it to financial assistance, then it becomes a very different debate.
Now, I've been looking at the NSS data, particularly on the food side, between the 1999-2000 survey, 4-5 survey, and 9-10 survey. And it's rather peculiar that the trends that were visible between 99-2000 and 2004-5 suddenly seem to have changed in the other 5 years. And I think it seems to have a lot to do with prices. That the rapid rise in food prices, especially that of certain foods, that has taken place, is having a big impact on the consumption numbers that one is seeing. And somehow it is hard to properly account for that across these surveys. One can use some indices, but they are only sort of approximations of the price movements that have taken place, because it's individual prices that are affecting consumption. So you find consumption of certain foods like fruits and vegetables. There is a big trend towards that. Animal foods and so on. But the prices, the price rise that has taken place in the second 5 years, 2004 and 9-10, that seems to have affected things quite a bit. So the trends, get little affected by that. On the other side, it is having a big impact on the rural areas, because the food prices means better incomes, in the rural areas, more profits there, and you see that as well, but partly that is mitigated by the mechanization that is taking place in the rural areas too. So number of factors, seem to be affecting it. It's hard to untangle that, in the data, but your your takes on the big trends and why national accounts doesn't match with NSS, is a puzzle. Right? It's a problem that has existed for a while, and something needs to be looked at in that. Yeah.
Please put pressure on the government if you have any sway on this.
Your puzzle number one that you had, the graph that you had, in that the NSS numbers, you showed that the NSS shows a more rapid growth in the consumption as compared to the national accounts numbers.
No, the national accounts is faster.
Yeah, but in the last 5 years,
In the table, yes.
Yeah. So in the last 5 years,
Very odd.
yeah,
In the last year.
and I think it has to do with prices, and taking count of them properly, because the
I suspect it has something to do with measurement changes, the way they were feeling this, but I think it requires some digging to figure out exactly where that happened. By looking at what happened with prices, budget shares, where the questions are placed in the questionnaire.
right.
Yeah, I think it takes some careful digging, but there is, I feel there's something to do with measurement certainly.
So you talked about the improvements in the poverty numbers, but has it really led to improvement in the quality of life of the people? As in, what I believe is it's mainly because of the government welfare schemes. So if tomorrow government stops this, I think they're going to get back to that because there is very less focus on providing skilled training to them. It's more of like making dependent on the government. So is it true, or are there any efforts made by the government?
I think everybody here is qualified to answer that equally. So I will turn to somebody else who wants to take it. I mean, I don't know. I think there's a million Indias, right? So it would be the case somewhere that things have improved. I mean, I don't believe that things have not improved on average, but I'm sure you could find places where things haven't improved. I'm sure you could find places where that it's not because of the PDS, it's not because of the midday meals, it's not because of Narega. There are states where those schemes haven't worked, where things have improved. But I also believe that where those programs have worked, they have had important impacts. I think some of the more difficult questions, there are questions about delivery of these programs, how can you strengthen delivery? But there are also sort of some higher order questions of trade-offs in terms of if you had a limited amount of state capacity and resources, where would you put that money? And I think those are some, I don't have an answer to it, but those are difficult questions. But I wouldn't say that the only thing that's happened is the transfer programs.
Yeah.
So the industry output has contracted for the third successive month, and as you've shown, the value add from agriculture is going down. So what do you think is going to be the growth engine for him?
These are all the difficult questions. What do I think will be the growth engine? I think the growth, I know, I don't have a one-take hat. See, I'm a student of data and I'm very bad at forecasting things. I think the engine should be manufacturing. I don't think services is going to get us there. Will manufacturing actually pick up? Are the ingredients already in place? I think you can suggest things should be done. If they get done, but will they have an impact? We think they will. I mean, certainly on the regulatory side. And I'm not referring to necessarily just the Industrial Disputes Act. I mean, that's the favorite one to beat up on, but there's many other things to do with enforcement, with compliance, with the enforcement regime, with general transactions costs that businesses face. So that the entry of one of the really striking things about India when you compare it to the East Asian economies is the size of firms. I mean, we just have millions of tiny firms, and then we have a fat tail at the end. We just have this big missing middle, and that's in my mind something that has to really, that's where we need to focus and resolve, so that entrepreneurship can actually pay dividends in terms of employment creation. Not just wealth generation for the entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Ma'am, how much is the correlation between NREGA and the poverty reduction as such? Because Bihar has done very good in terms of NREGA, and Professor Drees has also done an audit there. And in terms of other states, Bihar is growing well also. So,